Hello and welcome to Beyond Boundaries. My name is Justin Douglas. So pumped to have you with me today on this episode of Beyond Boundaries. If you want to learn more about me or find the show notes for this episode, you can go to pastorjustindouglas.com. You can interact there with feedback, comments, and questions, or you can reach out via Instagram. I'm at Pastor Justin Douglas. Also, please consider subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing. It really does make a difference. A few weeks ago, I traveled to New York City and sat down with Jonathan Williams. Jonathan is lead pastor of Forefront Church in Brooklyn. His book, She's My Dad, A Father's Transition and a Son's Redemption, was released a few months ago. We had an incredible conversation about his story and his book. Jonathan is a great guy, and I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you enjoy it too. Check it out. I'm here with Jonathan Williams, author of She's My Dad, A Father's Transition and a Son's Redemption, also pastor of Forefront NYC Church in Brooklyn. How are you doing, Jonathan?
Living the dream, as always.
Awesome. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself, a little overview of you, kind of the church, and then I definitely want to get into the book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a pastor of Forefront Church. It's here in Brooklyn, and been doing that since 2012. We are an LGBT affirming church in New York City, and we still identify as evangelical, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of a juxtaposition there. But in 2012 we started, and about 3 months after we started, my dad flew to New York to tell me something, right? And so I had no idea what that would be, and in my mind, I thought it like my dad committed insurance fraud. It was like gonna, it was gonna like go to jail for 2 months or something. And I was like, well, that stinks. But no, my dad came, and my dad said that he was transitioning to the female gender. That he was transgender and had felt this way his entire life, and so that was a shock. That was an absolute shock. I think at that point I didn't quite understand what it meant to be transgender.
Yeah.
And so
there wasn't a whole lot of context for that, even in culture at that point, right?
No. This is before Caitlyn Jenner, before Transparent, before Orange is the New Black.
Yeah.
And so it was all like, okay, so what is this about? I didn't get it. And, my dad was a pastor. So for me, my dad is a pastor and my hero, and the reason that I get into church planting, and so it felt like in one moment, like I lost it all, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're planning a church, which I know that you pastor a church too, you're meeting with like anybody who has a pulse, and you're working like 85 hours a week, and it's miserable. And so I'm like working 85 hours a week.
Is this the first year of the church plant?
This is 3 months in.
3 months in.
3 months in. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You're in like the red zone.
I'm in like
right
that,
there.
when you can't pick your head up.
Yeah.
So I was devastated. I mean, absolutely devastated.
How did you work through that? That's got to be that's obviously the story of the book. She's My Dad, which I've read. It's a great book. Like, do you want to share a little bit about like that journey, that process? Like you're working through this new information you found out about your dad, while you're also like at the margins just in life. You know what I mean?
Most definitely. Yeah. No,
it's a lot of stress. Probably,
lots of stress. And I think the hardest part was, this organization planted our church, and the organization is not an affirming organization, which is fine. I think they're a great organization still to this day.
So when you planted, were you planting as like a close to affirming church, or an affirming church, or were you kind of like just accepting of everybody? Like, I guess I'm curious your process.
Yeah,
on that.
I mean, we were accepting of everybody. I think at that point, in my mind, we were going to become affirming. Yeah. But in my mind, whatever, we were going to become affirming when we were self-supporting financially.
Gotcha.
Once we were out from underneath the wing of this church planting organization we were a part of.
Sure.
Then we will go ahead and do it. So I was thinking, 3-4 years down the road, we'll decide that we're an affirming church. Mm-hmm. And then when my dad came out to me, at the time he said you can't tell anybody in this organization. I'm on the board of this organization. If they find out, I'm gonna get fired. So not only not only am I planting a church, 3 months in, my dad just tells me that he's trans, but I also can't tell anybody because my dad will then lose his job. So really there, I didn't handle it well. I drank, legitimately, I drank a lot.
Wow.
And
you couldn't even tell like staff at your
I
church,
couldn't tell
probably
staff.
like outside of your family, obviously your wife, but like beyond
nobody else could know. I broke down about 6 months in and told my staff, but the only reason I told them is because they were like, "You're drinking way too much. What's going on? You changed seemingly overnight from someone who was like really excited to somebody who's really depressed, and we see it. Why?" And I was like, well, I need to let you know what's going on.
Wow.
So I always say, I wrote about it in the book, crying in the green room before church, just crying and being like, this sucks. I lost my dad. None of this makes sense anymore. And then, church would start at 10 and like 9:50, I'm like drying my eyes, walking downstairs, putting on a happy face, preaching, doing my thing. And then going home and being like, I'm done. This is awful.
How did you during that time? How did you, I guess, relate to your dad? Because you guys were pretty close, right? Like, and not that you were closer than you weren't, but I guess I'm trying to figure out like you were going to him for advice because obviously he's a pastor. You're going in. You've already been in the ministry as an associate, but you're going into kind of lead pastor ministry here and church planting, and I'm sure that's opening up all kinds of questions, right? that you have, and who better to go to than your dad, who's a seasoned veteran of sorts in this particular area. And so I would assume those first few months of church planning, you're talking to him regularly then, and
we were, So every day, for that matter,
and then
every day.
Then after this conversation, did things kind of change?
I didn't know what to do, right? Yeah. So I don't really know how to talk to my dad anymore, because it wasn't my dad. It was now this other person who I didn't know. And so I didn't want to meet her. I didn't want to meet her. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to know her in any way. It was interesting because even like the way I thought about LGBT issues, I recognized like so long as the story benefited me, I was happy to affirm the LGBTQIA community. Yeah. And as soon as it became personal, I was like, whoa, I don't know if I can do this anymore, which was disappointing in its own level. Like, oh, you're just a white neoliberal. You're all talk, but when it comes down to it, you don't want to take any action. You don't want to give anything up, Yeah. And I think that was something I was dealing with too, especially having gay friends in the church who were like, yeah, this is amazing. Your dad's coming out, when they did find out. Yeah. And I was like, well, doesn't feel that amazing to me. And that was that was a tough thing. And so really for about a year, I sort of wrestled with this because my dad was still working for this organization. Yeah. And so then when she finally came out to the organization, lost her job within a matter of days. Yeah. All that happened. And
was a microscope put on you right away when that happened? Yeah. Like, because I'm sure they're like, okay, so what?
I think people felt, people came to me and they were as shocked or as like angry or as perplexed as I was. They were like, what is this about? I don't get it. Yeah. And I was like, well, join the club. I don't quite get it either. I can't make sense of this either. And then it's interesting. Like, it's almost like people like came to me for permission to be upset about it. And so it was like this weird role to play where like I was getting phone calls daily and people would be like, hey, I heard this about your dad. Is it true? Yeah, it's true. Wow. I don't really know what to think about this. And I'd be like, well, I'm upset. And they'd be like, I think I'm upset too, And so then I'm playing that role for a whole group of people. Yeah. And that felt unhealthy. I didn't realize it at the time, but it felt unhealthy. Yeah. I think it really put me in a place where the traditional evangelical church, the kind of everybody's welcome, but once we get to the point of affirmation, sorry, it doesn't work. Where I was very comfortable just hanging with them because I didn't quite understand what was happening with my dad, and so it was almost like I took a step back in terms of my social leanings, right? They became less like, oh, I want to be a part of an affirming church to like, no, I think I'm comfortable right here with these people who aren't necessarily affirming because I wasn't affirming of my dad, right? Yeah. That's the ultimate reason why.
How long did the anger, the like unknown of like, what does this mean? What is like, What are some steps along the way that, like, I guess would be like mile marker moments? I know, I guess you obviously tell your staff now, at least you probably have a little bit of relief around the office for people to have some context, right?
Yeah.
For like what you're going through. And then, obviously when, your dad becomes public with this,
right.
There's probably obviously it gets difficult because you get all these phone calls, but there's a sense of like, okay, now I don't have to hold this secret so tightly anymore. Cause that was probably,
that was easier. That
too.
was better. Yeah. I think the biggest mile marker moment for me, was the worst moment and the best moment all at once. It's funny. I think about it now and I'm like, if scripture's still alive, which I think it is, like this feels like scripture to me. Mm-hmm. But my dad and I, we always bonded over baseball.
The All-Star game story.
Game, yeah.
So this is a good story.
So important for me.
Yeah.
And so I said, Dad, come to the All-Star game with me. It's at Citi Field where the Mets play. And I grew up, season tickets to the Mets and all that. And
how long is this after your conversation?
This is probably, this has to be almost 8-9 months.
Okay.
8-9 months maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
So 8-9 months afterwards, I still haven't met her. Mm-hmm. I don't know her name. I don't want to interact with her. Mm-hmm. So I said, come to the game. This attempt to sort of reclaim my dad or get my dad back.
Also a sense of masculinity. It's baseball.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Something that we bonded over. Yeah. And then she couldn't come. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why can't you come? And she was like, you don't even want to know. And I was like, all right, I think you're not coming because you're doing something that's going to be a part of your transition. Mm-hmm. So I go to the game by myself and it's like the lowest point for me. It's like, this is brutal. I lost my dad. I don't have anything anymore. And I meet this random guy. His name's the mayor. He calls himself the mayor. I still am Facebook friends with the mayor. But the mayor, he grabs me. He calls me pasta. That's how he talks. And, he takes me down to field level and we start taking pictures with players and getting autographs and this and that. And, my seats are way up high at the top of the stadium. Yeah. And he's like, Pasta, just stay here for a sec. We're sitting with the families. The families are all going to go up to their luxury boxes. We'll have a seat. Sure enough, he's right. Families go up to luxury boxes. We have plenty of seats to sit in.
That's what I do.
Yeah, just watch the game. So then he asked me for a ride home. Give him a ride home. My car breaks down at 1 a.m. I get a flat tire on the BQE. Oh, man. And my jack doesn't work. So I know how to change a tire, but my jack is not working. So I'm on the Brooklyn Queens Expressway at 1 a.m. My phone's not working because I'm taking all these pictures, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't have a phone either. And we literally sit there for 2 hours. And I'm like, what are we gonna do? I can't get this car. I don't want to leave the car because something's gonna happen to it.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, the mayor's he's like, oh, Pastor, there's 2 ladies of the night coming this way. And sure enough, 2 women, 2 sex workers, come towards us and how you doing? And it was weird. I just sort of lost it. And I was like, I'm doing really bad. My dad is transitioning, becoming a woman. And my car broke down, and my dad was supposed to go to the game with me, but he didn't go because of the transition. And now I don't have a jack, and I don't know what to do. And these 2 women just looked at me, and then one of them, just goes, "You need a jack?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just need a jack for my car." Doesn't listen to the other stuff I said, and she goes, "Oh, okay," and walks away. And then the mayor's like, Pastor, we're going to get robbed. They're coming back to rob us. And I'm like, I know, they're going to come back to rob us. So 10 minutes later, they come back with a jack. And they're like, do you need anything else? And I was like, no, fix the car in 15 minutes, And then that guy, the mayor, was like, Pastor, something important happened today. And I was like, yeah, man, the game was cool. Interesting thing. He goes, no. He goes, something was redeemed. And I was like, this guy doesn't go to church, nothing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, all right, God's speaking to me through this. Mm-hmm. And so the next morning, I got home at 4 a.m. The next morning, I called my dad. And I said, hey, I want to meet you. And I said, what's your name? Tell me your name. So she said, well, my name's Paula. And she goes, it's just 1 letter. It's not that big of a deal. And I was like, it's a huge deal. Yeah. It's a really, really big effing deal.
Yeah.
And I was like, but I'm glad to know you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you. It was this big pivotal moment in my life. Yeah, I go back to that moment often as like the moment when I knew I would never be estranged from my dad. Like the moment that I knew it was going to be okay.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So from there, how long till you met Paula?
I mean, I met Paula 2 months later.
Okay.
And that was hard. I mean, it was really hard. She looked nothing like... I mean, like in one way, it was really good because she looked great. I was like, oh, you're very, you look great. Yeah. Whatever else there is to say. Yeah. But I was like, but you look nothing like my dad, Yeah. And so it was hard. That was definitely a hard thing.
Sure.
And really, it sort of set me back in a place where I needed a little bit more time to sort of process everything. Yeah. She was great. She was really gracious about that. But it was also like time where I used to like, my whole big thing was like, did my dad ever really exist? Or was my dad dead? Or who was this woman who knows everything about me and I know nothing about her, Yeah. And so it was a time where I had to sort through that and came to a place where, yeah, my dad did exist. Like very consciously, if she wanted to be a woman the whole time, then for my dad to exist as my dad, as a man, that was like a willful, conscious existing for my sake. And then that changed everything. I was like, whoa, like you did this for me. You stayed a man for me so that I could have a dad. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
now, how long till, I mean, you obviously have kids as well. So how long till that? I mean, I in your TED Talk, I think, you and Paula did a TED Talk.
We did a TED Talk.
In your
together,
TED Talk, I think she says something like, when one person in the family transitions, everybody transitions.
Everybody transitions.
I think that's a really good kind of way of thinking about it. And I think certainly that applies to transitioning transgender-wise, but it also applies to when one person comes out, kind of the whole family has to process that. The whole, like, I think this is on LGBTQ plus, like, there's a certain level of, like, everyone has a certain level of processing and probably a good amount of like expectations, dreams, desires, things like that, like getting married, having kids. These can all these things, these visions that you have. If you're a parent, for example, for your kids might change, and some of that, obviously, as a son, some of your expectations are changing, and that's requiring a process and a transition that you're having to go through. But as a parent, you also kind of want to be like, okay, I've got kids, and this is a very complicated thing, and I'm having trouble processing it. At what time do I expose them to this? And this is their grandpa, and like, so talk a little bit about that. And I think part of the value there is like acknowledging that these subject matters and these conversations, it's okay to say they're not easy. Like, and that it takes an amount of like wisdom and just discernment on how to navigate. Like,
I mean, 100. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's really why I wrote the book. I wrote it because I was like, there was nothing. When my dad came out, I looked around for support or for, ways that I can go about, being angry. Like if I wanted to be angry about it, my whole family was upset. My mom, 42 years of marriage, to my dad, and that was going to come to an end. And so what I found was like a lot of advice about like how to be supportive. But I was like, that's great. I'll get there. Yeah. But right now I need to work through some of the pain, like my own transition. Yeah. So this is, somebody said this and I agree. Like, yeah, you have all these thoughts, you have all these plans, all these feelings, all these emotions. And then they all change in an instant. And so somebody likened it. They're like, yeah, it's like when you're planning a really great vacation and you're planning a vacation to Italy and you buy all the guidebooks and you know exactly where you're going and you know about the vineyards you're going to go to and you even take Italian lessons, and then you get on the plane and the plane lands in Holland and you're like, I'm supposed to go to Italy. And they're like, well, now you're in Holland and here you are. So the thing becomes like, well, yeah, I'm going to be upset that I'm not where I wanted to be or not where we plan to be. But if I stay upset or if I stay in that place, I'm going to miss out on what's beautiful here. Yeah. If I stay upset about not being in Italy, I'm going to miss what's beautiful about Holland.
That's a good metaphor.
Yeah. So it's not mine; it's somebody else's.
No, but that's a really good one. Yeah. So your children, how does that?
So all that to say, I think to continue the metaphor. Yeah. I think with the kids, we were like, all right, kids, you think we're going to Italy, but we're in Holland. Yeah. And so because we are, things are going to look different, literally. And so we talked to them about that. What's funny is the way kids respond and react. I think, they were 6 and 4 at the time, and I remember my oldest saying, she said, so really Grandpa is just going to look on the outside the way that he's always felt on the inside. And I said, yeah. And she goes, okay. I don't know. It's like this, let the little children come to me from Matthew.
Yeah.
Like I read that now with those eyes, like just the ability to wholly accept somebody without the baggage that comes with it. Right. Like that's how I see that modeled. And so, Paula shows up, and obviously she looks very different. And so the girls are up, not afraid, but they didn't get up and run to her. And so then my 4-year-old was like, Grandpa, do you have a penis? And like, we all just started laughing, like broke the tension. And the question was never answered, but it broke the tension for sure. And then my girls were like, Grandpa, come back and play in our room. And then, my dad, who's always been an incredible grandparent, was like, okay. And then the kids started calling her Grand Paula, which I thought was really...
That's a
really good name.
It is.
It's a good name. There's been a couple times where my oldest especially has said, like, I miss Grandpa. And I'm like, it's okay. You're allowed to miss Grandpa. That's all right. And I want to continue to affirm that transitions they're not easy. They're not cut and dry. Yeah, I'm not a Kardashians fan, but I'll never forget, like, there was this tabloid or whatever that's like, Kim blasts Caitlyn Jenner by posting a picture of Bruce. And I just remember thinking, like, she's not blasting anybody. She misses Bruce. Yeah. And that's it. And like feeling this weird, odd connection to that situation.
You're like, I've never felt more connected to Kim Kardashian. And this feels really weird.
I felt like, oh, yeah, I get that. You're not blasting anybody. Like, it was funny to feel that way. But yeah, it's a process for everybody. Yeah. And I remember like my dad saying, now that I'm on these hormones or whatever, my brain chemistry is changing, and I'm responding this way to these chemicals and this and that. And I remember saying, like legitimately, our entire family's brain chemistry is changing because we're creating new neural pathways to see you now as a woman, when for me 30 years I saw you as somebody else, right? So we're all our brains are all changing through this process,
Of course.
And like I said, she's always been gracious about it. So she was like, you're right.
So we've talked a lot about the personal journey you've gone on, and also the family journey. Talk a little bit about the career realities that are happening through this, because I know even personally that as you come to really intimately connect with LGBT individuals, and for you, obviously it's in your family, but as I've got to know stories, you begin to realize what's at stake in these conversations, and you begin to realize the type of community you want to cultivate as a pastor, the type of values that you want. And I'm assuming over this time you're becoming a little more compassionate and understanding, not only to LGBT, but also to family members of LGBT, right? Because now you identify with even their process and anger, and hoping that you can maybe support them as a church. But like, I would assume all this is happening, and how's the church planting network you're connected to receiving that? And how's the church and staff processing? Just talk a little bit about that as a leader. There might be other leaders listening to this who are like, man, I'm feeling a nudge in that direction, or I'm feeling some pressure or some just personal transformation happening. But that's a scary place to be in. I know that personally too. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and really you should interview yourself for a podcast one day with everything you're going through with LGBTQIA affirmation right now. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a good question. I think what I realized is that if I was I wanted to be an ally. I needed to be an ally. As much as I was hurt by my dad's transition, at the end of the day, I believe that God affirms and includes all. I mean, I just believe that at the end of the day, regardless. And I couldn't not listen to that voice, the voice of the Spirit, or whatever we want to call it.
Definitely, yeah.
And so I was like, we have to transit. We have to become an LGBTQIA affirming church. We have to. And so we did, and we lost $100,000 probably, and a third of our church walked out the door. I'm really, really glad we did it. And I'm glad we did it because, and I say this all the time, because people's lives are at stake. You know, people have been told that they are not made in the image of God. You know, if somebody told me I wasn't made in the image of God, that would be devastating. And yet people are told that constantly by the church, constantly. And I'm like, okay, it's, you know, we're all made in the image of God. We're made beautifully in the image of God. There's a story that I tell in our TED Talk about my kids walking down the street with my dad. And they're like, you know, my dad's Paula and she's transitioned. And they're like holding her hands and they're like dancing and kicking and playing and laughing. It was this beautiful moment. And I was like, this is how God sees my dad. The way my kids are right now with like the joy and the dancing and the laughing, this is God sees my dad and this is how God responds. And there are too many people who don't believe that about themselves. And so I was like, okay, we're going to be an ally church, even if it means that we're giving up money and we're giving up people, and even if it means it's going to be a really scary next few months. We're going to do it because lives are at stake. Lives, you know, these lives, you know, LGBTQIA lives are worth saving. You know? And so we did. And what's really great is like I think God honors that. And so we went through a bit of a downturn, and it's been almost 4 years now. And we're double the size we were when we became an Affirming church. We're the most financially stable we've ever been. I think that matters, and I think God honors it. Yeah, for sure.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So through that transition, are you kind of, well, you have some things to prioritize too, because one of the things I appreciate is that some churches, I think, become LGBTQIA affirming, you might say despite the Bible or despite Jesus, or like, does that make sense? Like they don't really focus on Jesus. Yeah. One of the things I appreciate about you and Forefront is like, you're like, no, we're Jesus centered. We're doing this because of Jesus, because Jesus compels us to lead with love. Because like, and I think so many people kind of write off affirming churches as like, well, they're just not teaching Jesus. And it's like, you guys are like firmly centered on Jesus.
100%.
Like, and even you would consider yourself in some ways evangelical. Like,
yeah, you know,
that word is attached to so much now that it's hard to.
It's a loaded word.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Like, if we take the word for what it really means, it means good news.
Yep.
And I say this all the time. I say this is really good news, this gospel message that everyone's included, everyone's affirmed. And so I say all the time, we are a Jesus church, Jesus first, and the death and resurrection is amazing news.
Yes.
And we happen to be LGBT affirming because the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and the life of Christ is such amazing news.
Yeah.
Because Jesus shows us what that looks like. And then, you know, the inevitable follow-up question is, well, you know, do you believe in the Bible? It's like, my goodness, the Bible's amazing. Yeah. It's this living and breathing book, and if it is living and breathing, then it's continuing. It's still being written, right?
Yeah, and it's still inspiring people today.
Exactly.
Like it's inspirational because it's inspired by God.
Absolutely, and I think it's still inspiring people to write. You know, obviously not in the book itself, but you know, it's inspiring us to make moves and to write and to do different things. And I firmly believe, like 100% believe, that we are affirming, and that if Scripture was continuing to progress the way, you know, if we had extra pages, it would show that would be something that God ordains.
Yeah.
You should buy my book because I read a little bit more about that part. I'm not going to talk about it right now.
Yeah. But no, that's good. You should definitely buy the book for sure, for sure. So if people want to connect with you, follow you, learn more about your church, buy the book, where can they follow you? Where can they find you on social, and some of your links, some of the different things you want them to follow?
Yeah, you can go to jonathanswilliams.com.
Okay.
And you could do everything. You can follow me on social media there. You can buy the book there. Whatever. I'm more than happy to.
We'll post links in the show notes.
Yeah,
too.
Please do. No, I love having conversations about about this story. Every now and again, my dad get to do it together, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So
I got to meet your dad at a Q conference.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And Paula was amazing.
Yeah, she's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for being on the Beyond Boundaries podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Another episode in the books. Go check out Jonathan's book, She's My Dad. There's also a TED Talk that Paula and Jonathan did. That link is in the show notes. And if you are in Brooklyn looking for a church, check out forefrontnyc.com. It was great to have you with me today on Beyond Boundaries. If you want to learn more about me or find show notes for this episode, you can go to pastorjustindouglas.com. You can interact there with feedback, comments, and questions, or you can reach out via Instagram. I'm at Pastor Justin Douglas. Please consider subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing. May you go and live a life that is beyond boundaries, giving others love, exploring new ideas, and championing belonging.